Hi, and I'm now speaking all the languages. I'm Rodina. I'm the project manager for Creative Impact Lab. I'm a visual artist, and I've been working with these great people here that will introduce themselves in a bit. And as you know, this is a collaboration with Medrar, and Medrar is a contemporary art space based in Cairo, which plays a very fundamental role as an artistic hub, space and cultural incubator for emerging and established artists by basically promoting conversations, collaborations, and experimental art, and also things like workshops and labs and so on. Also, as you know, there will be a workshop, the Creative Impact Lab, and it's a 5-week online creative exchange by 01 Lab, and it's also supported by the US Embassy in Cairo, and it's hosted by Medrar, and the workshop will be led by the artist Katherine Behar, and you will be meeting her in a bit. Just one last thing, so Katherine will have her video on and a screen share. So if you want to navigate and have them both next to each other, it's just easy. You navigate to 2 screens next to each other to be able to see Katherine and the screen share. And yeah, I'll move on to who's next. Maya?
Yes, that's right. I'm next. Thanks, Rodina. Thanks for starting us off. Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Holm. I am the Program and Communications Manager at 01, as Rodina kindly introduced us. We are a San Francisco-based nonprofit that leverages art, science, and technology to create social change. I also want to welcome you to this artist talk by Katherine, which is titled Backups and Backchannels: From Saving to Secrets in Art, Technology, and Women's Empowerment. And so, yes, as mentioned, this is the kickoff event for Creative Impact Lab Cairo. And Katherine is the lead artist for the lab. She's also an American new media and performance artist and writer based in Brooklyn, New York. Her work uses materialism and feminism to explore contemporary digital culture and is unified by an approach which she calls object-oriented feminism. So I wanted to give a little bit more context about this lab that's been mentioned. So through Creative Impact Lab Cairo, Katherine is going to be working with a cohort of 20 participants in Egypt, and she's going to be facilitating a series of workshops and project development for participants to produce artistic prototypes. So through the lab, participants will receive feedback on their creations from panelists, and their prototypes are going to be presented in a virtual exhibition mid-month in mid-July. So I'll have some more information about how to tap into that event at the end of this artist talk. And as been mentioned, this lab is a collaborative effort. So I also want to acknowledge and thank the US Embassy in Cairo for their support, as well as our local host partner, Medrar. Thank you also to our production and technical assistants, Rodina Foed and Maya Hilbert. And finally, thank you to our outreach partners, Out of the Circle, D2D Art, and Cairotronica. So at this point, I would like to pass the mic to Kevin Kraft, who is the Assistant Cultural Affairs Officer at US Embassy Cairo.
Hey, thank you very much, Maya. And thank you all for attending this. I want to say, first of all, I'm Kevin Kraft. I work in the public affairs section, particularly in culture. I'm really excited about this project. I've heard great things about Medrar and haven't yet gotten to learn enough about what they're doing here in Cairo. So I'm excited about that. And I know that the work that 01 is doing and has done is excellent. So I just wanted to say really quickly, the kind of things that we like to support in the embassy. I mean, we support a lot of programs that are oriented on social impact, a lot in entrepreneurship, hackathons, education, STEM training, many of the things that are important to all of us. But I studied art, and we don't often support like straight art projects. So that's why I'm particularly excited about this project, because it does both things. It women's empowerment. It impacts and has social change effects, while at the same time being innovative in the arts. And I don't want to say too much because I'm really excited to hear Katherine talk. So I'll leave it at that. But I want to thank again 01 and Medrar and Katherine, and especially the participants. I'm really also looking forward to the virtual exhibition at the end. And I know we all wish that that this could be in person, but maybe the next one will be. And I'm glad that at least we get to do this. So thank you all very much, Shamshir, Maya, Katherine, and Medrar, and to the participants. Good luck with everything that you're doing, and I look forward to seeing the outcome. Thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. I think that is my cue. Thank you so much for the welcome. I am going to just take a moment to share my screen with you. One moment, please. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. First of all, thank you so much for this warm welcome. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Katherine Behar, and I'm tremendously honored to be here virtually in the context of this exciting cultural exchange, Creative Impact Lab Cairo. I want to begin by thanking many of the new friends in Egypt and the US who are making this possible in Cairo. I'd like to thank our hosts at Medrar, Victoria Kornakia, Theodore Amgad, Mohammed Alam, and Rodina Foued. Our outreach partners, Out of the Circle in particular, Elham Katab, D2D Art, and Cairotronica. And in the US, I'd like to thank 01 and Shamshir Verk and Maya Holm, the US Embassy Cairo, in particular, Kevin Kraft and Gada Abdelghani for their generous support of this initiative, as well as Maya Hilbert from Beirut College. And most of all, throughout Egypt, I'd like to thank the 20 incredible artists and cultural innovators who will co-create this lab with me as participants. I'm delighted to get to know you and your work even better as we collaborate in the coming weeks around this critical issue of women's empowerment and digital art. So tonight, it's my pleasure to kick off our lab by sharing some of the work I do. My talk is called Backups and Backchannels, From Saving to Secrets in Art, Technology, and Women's Empowerment. I'm riffing a little bit on the title of my 2019 solo exhibition. Oh, I've just got a note, I need to slow down a little bit, okay? Sorry, I'm talking too fast. So I'm riffing with this title, I'm riffing a little bit on the title of my 2019 solo exhibition, Backups. And I chose the name Backups because I found that the multiple meanings of this term reverberate in various registers across my work and thinking, even beyond the works in that show. Now, because these ideas connecting digital art and women's empowerment are at the heart of all aspects of my practice, the workshop I'll be leading will also be organized around motifs of backups and backchannels. So for some of the participants who I know are in the audience, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know you through the Q&A and also on Friday when we begin, please consider this talk to be kind of a taste of some of the frameworks we'll explore in our workshop activities. But before we do a kind of deep dive into backups and backchannels, I'd like to offer a quick overview of who I am and what I do. So let's get started. I work across a number of different media, but whatever particular form I'm engaging, my work consistently deals with gender, race, and labor in digital culture, all of which I approach through a dynamic of resistance. I think about resistance sculpturally in terms of the unyielding material resistance of objects that confront us, as well as performatively in terms of performances of political resistance or resistance as a kind of performative action. This is why, as far as my work deals with gender and labor in digital culture, the politics that my work promotes is specifically grounded in anti-racist feminism and workers' solidarity. My approach is to return our focus to the laboring body in settings of work where human and non-human bodies may end up colliding in ways that can be unexpected, confounding, and perhaps even a tad bit rebellious. My practice spans sculpture, robotic installations, single and multi-channel video, and live performance. And I move quite fluidly between making art in all of these kinds of media and also writing. So somewhat inevitably, this means that my art ends up embodying two main theories I've been working on. The first is object-oriented feminism, or OOF for short, as we like to call it, which is the subject of this edited collection. Object-oriented feminism is both a collaborative theoretical movement and a working method for my own artwork. The ideas in OOF, as they relate to art practice, also extend to curatorial projects like And Another Thing, Non-Anthropocentrism and Art, which I co-curated with Emmy Michelson. And the second theoretical direction is what I'm calling decelerationist aesthetics, which I've been developing both in my art and in writing, such as Bigger Than You, Big Data, and Obesity. So you'll notice that there's a move toward a decelerated slowness in that idea of resistance. It's a kind of friction that's both physical and political. So all of this is to say that we'll be looking at both the process and the ideas behind my artwork this evening. I'm planning to speak for about 50 minutes or so we will have time for questions and answers at the end. And that's enough about me now. Without further ado, let's get started with backups and back channels. As I was saying, the thinking behind this talk comes from my exhibition Backups, which was presented at Masmanian Gallery. So this is an installation view. Today, I'll be sharing some works that were included in this exhibition, but also connecting my thinking around this core notion of backups with other projects I've done over the years. I'm interested in how digital culture produces a profusion of backups or extra copies of things. I teach new media art, so I'm constantly telling my students, you have to be backed up in at least 3 places. So partly in my role as a professor of technology and just being a user of technology in my own life, I'm thinking about backing up things like files. But as an artist, I'm also thinking maybe a bit more philosophically or metaphorically about how we back up ourselves. Whether it's a data profile that is a backup record of our online activity, like in modeling big data, the pink and gray videos, or a robotic AI device like Alexa that's meant to copy human behavior, like in Knock Knock, which is the little white sculpture you can barely see in the back corner here. Or a familiar product like a keyboard that may have spawned oodles of design variations behind the scenes before becoming the recognizable shape we know today, like in Shelf Life, these black sculptures on carts. Or maybe an email script that's got our back by sending out copies of emails so that busy humans don't have to bother, like in autoresponder.exe, a video that's just out of frame in this photo, but I'll share shortly. In all of these situations, I'm very interested in how many technologies have a function not of backing data up, but of backing humans up. I think of backups as copies that, at least in intent, minimize risk through redundancy. So does anyone have a Mac and use this? This is Apple's built-in backup software called Time Machine. The name Time Machine for backup software is quite interesting. As you can see, the software makes a series of snapshots in time so you can browse back to a previous image of how things were. And in that way, it feels like you have the godlike ability to recover the past. A lot of what I think we do with backups is past oriented like this. But I want to propose to you that perhaps part of why backups are so very abundant right now has to do with the unpredictability of the future. Take the example of big data. Big data is not only a record of the past, its main purpose these days is as the basis for predictive models of possible futures. It works like this. You feed a lot of past data into a computer program that analyzes that data and comes up with a variety of models of what the future might look like. These could be climate models or economic models or models of the spread of infectious disease or the patterns of your social networks or shopping habits, just about anything. The irony is that the more data we save about the past, the more models we're able to make of the future using predictive analytics. And being bombarded with all of these uncertain futures in the news, in alerts on our phones, these may be adding up to an anxiety that makes us want the security of more backups. So backing up might really be a time machine that travels in two directions at once, unlike Apple's version that only lets you go backward. So the first day of our workshop will explore backups as time machines. This talk is also a time machine. So tonight we'll be traveling back to examples from history and forward to the untold possibilities afforded by art. For example, minimizing risk through redundancy is a really important concept in the history of digital culture. It's literally a founding design principle for the internet. This is Paul Baran, who was a big fan of backups. During the Cold War, he came up with the idea that a distributed network would be more resistant to nuclear attack. That's why today's internet is designed with multiple server computers, and technically, any computer that's connected to the internet can also be a server. And as we all know, things connected to the internet are distributed all over the place, in bedrooms, in bags, pockets, wrists. You're probably or hopefully looking at one right now. So having so many of them makes them far less vulnerable to a single central hub, like a broadcast tower for TV or radio that could get wiped out with a single missile. This is how Baran sketched it out, and he called this robustness as a factor of redundancy. It means that if you want to be robust, and that means to be healthy or strong or simply to be able to survive, you'd better have more than one of anything that's important to you. But that was the 1960s. And when I look around today, I can't help but think that redundancy has gotten a little out of hand and may no longer be a sign of a robust culture, but rather a signal of our profound uncertainty. If we think back to Baran's idea that having a backup is a security feature, it's like a means to protect ourselves. Covering ourselves over with copies is a way to buffer against the vulnerability of living in the contemporary world, which, let's face it, can be a pretty precarious, unpredictable place, no matter how many predictive models we make to try to prepare ourselves. And certainly the global pandemic and all of the predictive models that accompanied it are a great example. Uncertain copies brings me to my sculpture series, Shelf Life. I always tell students that if they get to a certain point in making something and they want to try something new, they should save a copy so that they have what they know they like, and then they can experiment with new directions in a separate file. Shelf life imagines these discarded versions that tend to pile up on the way to a final product. What shapes were tried and rejected before keyboards became rectangles? I've been thinking about genetic algorithms that produce endless generations of design possibilities. Like Darwinian natural selection between generations in a species, algorithms produce thousands of variations, then select a handful of the best to proceed to the next round. From those, produce thousands of offspring variations, select the best, and so on. Most machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques rely on similar generational processes. So for me, the shelf life objects are like the lost generations, potential keyboard designs that escaped the black box. They're not rectangular. Maybe these alternative organic keyboard configurations have been stuck in storage, just waiting to be implemented. With the title Shelf Life, I've been thinking about how these organic bulbous forms take on a lifelike vital quality, mimicking biological mutations. On their wheeled carts, they look almost ready to roll, to spring to life. Yet at the same time, the term shelf life is also a reminder of their limited lifespan. Like all of our devices, they're only fresh, shiny, and new for so long. I wanted to memorialize these dysfunctional dollops of an alternate reality, because even successful rectangular designs hint at the inevitability of their own demise. The result is that these sculptures are familiar but strange, like the QWERTY keyboard layout itself, which was designed to be just unfamiliar enough to slow down the process of rapid typing, which tangled keys of early typewriters, confounding typists who were too quick with the more intuitive alphabetic layout. Here's an image of another early typing interface, the Malling-Hansen writing ball that was used by the famous 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche dreamed of a transparent interface, a machine that would directly transcribe his thoughts, and he hoped that the writing ball would be that machine. Nietzsche was going blind, so he learned touch typing in order to continue to write his philosophy without relying on his failing eyes. But as the media historian Friedrich Kittler tells the story, Nietzsche soon discovered that the writing ball was not the transparent interface he hoped for after all. Changing how he wrote changed what he wrote. Once he started typing, Nietzsche's writing became much shorter, more telegraphic, and more aphoristic. He confessed, quote, "Our writing tools are also working on our thoughts," close quote. Like Nietzsche, we experience the same thing when we try to condense and accelerate our thoughts, for example, into a set number of characters on Twitter. Or as we've observed, when political speech is carried out on a platform with such restrictions, it not only affects what can be said within that character limit, but ultimately transforms politics itself. So the next project I'd like to share imagines what happens when we ourselves are reshaped by our daily interactions with big data. Modeling Big Data is a 6-channel video installation in which I parody how computer culture favors hoarding, overproduction, and excess. I perform as an obese data body, so stuck in the cycle of generating data that, like so-called big data, it's become swollen by its own data glut. I repeat an endless series of movements that are comically inadequate attempts to mimic common computer routines, and I call these data gestures. There's clicking, buffering, caching, and pinging. So I'll play one of the videos now as a sample. This is clicks. It's just under 2 minutes, so I'm going to play a short section for you. Okay, I think you probably get the idea. So the data trail I produce by clicking is a backup copy of my own online identity. I can't stop myself from clicking, so I'm actively overproducing my own surrogate copy that backs myself up in data. And this backup is growing into something much bigger than I am. Thinking back to how Nietzsche's keyboard changed his writing and his thinking, I believe that the much hyped phenomenon of big data is changing our sense of self. This overproduced data profile is bloated beyond recognition, becoming the excess weight of the figure itself. The organic protrusions and slow growths in shelf life sculptures and the lumpy, swollen costumes in modeling big data both present a calcified impediment to movement, getting at this idea of resistance I call decelerationist aesthetics. Both pieces mimic biological overgrowth. And the next piece I'll share is a robotic performance that is also highlighting seemingly organic irregularity. So this is the first of a few pieces about the automation of labor. And I'd like to pause here for a moment to clarify the relationship. So in the works I've shown so far, like these two that you're looking at, I'm looking at the way that backups accumulate. These projects have been about archives and histories, about backups as a noun, like the things you put in the archive, things we save, things we retrieve, the histories we choose to forget, and those we choose actively to remember. And of course, memory practices pertain to how we might approach women's empowerment. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and look at the way backups perform. These next projects are about backups as a way to be, about backups as a verb. When you back someone up, you give them support, also clearly relevant for women's empowerment. This also relates back to Baran's notion of backups as a security feature. But for Baran, security comes from passive redundancy. And I am interested in how security can also come from active community. During the workshop, we'll discuss the different kinds of backup security needed for women's empowerment and use art to create some. Our backups are our comrades and our community, the people who've got our backs, the friends and family we turn to. Thinking about communities, you'll notice that throughout this talk, I'm giving many examples from an American context, whether it's an American history of computation or American feminist thought, or products made by big American tech companies, or American places like a Brooklyn neighborhood near where I live, or even American pop culture. This talk sketches some of my artistic and intellectual communities from which my work arises. The thing about the Creative Impact Lab Cairo that I am most excited for is learning about the art, technology, and women's empowerment communities in Egypt through our cultural exchange. So to continue with the next series of works that deal with automation, I'm thinking about an expanded community, not just a human community, but also a community that includes the technologies and objects in our midst. These projects specifically deal with things that perform to back us up. Specifically, I'm looking at automation where robots and other non-human devices perform human labor. And this opens up some interesting confusions between humans and non-human objects, especially when automation backs up gendered tasks that are often considered women's work. This project, Roomba Roomba, presents a pair of robotic vacuums with potted rubber trees strapped to their backs, dancing to a karaoke backing track for High Hopes, a children's song made famous by Frank Sinatra. Roombas are intelligent robotic vacuums that learn how to navigate the space they're in order to clean it effectively. Paired with the music, their algorithmic movements look choreographed and charismatic. When human audience members are in the space, their bodies change the room's contours. So the Roombas investigate, giving us the impression that they are alive, flirtatious, and social. So here's a short video of this interaction. Okay, so Roomba Roomba pivots on a series of solidarities between things that don't seem to go together: natural and artificial, biological and machinic, behind the scenes service work and performative display. The song's hero is a little old ant who's a worker who manages to move a rubber tree plant through a combination of irrational aspiration and hard labor. This cheerful song and notion that plants and machines are dancing and behaving socially seem playful, but the Roomba's performance also carries a darker message for me. For one thing, the song High Hopes teaches children to overcome adversity by working as hard as they possibly can to achieve. Today, these traits make for prime neoliberal subjects. The ant has long been a symbol of the worker, and in Roomba Roomba, I've recast it as an even more perfect worker, a machine. In previous works, I've tried to perform a non-human machine's process, something like modeling big data. But in Roomba Roomba, the machine performs what is traditionally humans' work, the gendered activity of vacuuming. I consider how contemporary digital tools and gadgets are robots in the etymological sense, meaning the origin of the word. And the origin of the word robot is forced labor. This is R.U.R. Rotham's Universal Robots, a play from the 1920s by Karel Čapek, which coined the term robot from a Czech root meaning forced labor, serf labor, or servitude. I cannot emphasize enough how important this history is, because this means that whenever we talk about robots, we're really talking about social relationships, because we're employing the metaphor of slavery. A common complaint of digital culture is saying we are slaves to the machine. But I'm also looking at how machines are slaves to us and what that says about human ethics, especially as we humanize them as our companions in films like Her or in devices like Alexa. To truly work towards women's empowerment, we must recognize these sometimes violent histories that underpin contemporary technosocial dynamics, and art can provide a way to begin these difficult conversations. The fact that humans and non-humans can be interchangeable so far as their labor is concerned sets the stage not only for the technical automation of labor, but also for the political project of object-oriented feminism, or OOF. OOF seeks to imbue the universal condition of objecthood in a so-called flat ontology with a feminist analysis of power engaged as and through the politics and ethics of being an object. Being an object is a familiar position for many people, including women, people of color, people with disabilities, people of lower socioeconomic classes, people without papers, and so forth. This experience is the kind of thing that makes you want to say, oof. So most importantly, OOF studies objects from the inside-out position of being an object oneself. This is why modesty and self-implication are utterly critical for human objects to practice. Our objects will inform our approach to new media and women's empowerment in the workshop. Seeing our similarities with objects may encourage humans to act with more care for the object world, a positive outcome in my view, that can be encouraged through art. But we don't only have to look to art, because historically, before computers were computers, computers were women. In the 1940s, a computer wasn't a thing. It was a job. So computers were people who performed computation. Bakers bake, teachers teach, and computers compute. Computing was monotonous number crunching, a kind of clerical work that was usually done by women, both because there were more women available to work during World War II, and because of cultural assumptions that women were more suited to this kind of mindless tedium. And in fact, for this reason, women were considered ideal computers from the late 18th century. So this slide shows women computers working on tabulating data. Here are two women computers working on the ENIAC machine, the first general purpose electronic computer. And this incredible image shows a male programmer issuing commands to a female computer. And this is very persistent imagery that we see again in updated form, for example, in the 2013 Spike Jonze movie, Her, and frankly, all over the place. So I've borrowed these archival images from essays by Jennifer Light and Wendy Chen to show the direct link between the invisible black boxed labor of the machine and the invisibility of women's work. Of course, this notion of women computers has risen in public awareness through the 2016 Theodore Melfi film, Hidden Figures, in which computer work is dehumanized along not only gendered, but also racially charged lines. So my work recognizes these material, historical connections between working bodies and the computer, and advances broadly inclusive solidarities under such conditions. Ironically, automation exploits and eliminates redundancies at every level. As we'll see in the next piece, autoresponder.exe, even the white-collar work of bot-like bureaucrats. This is autoresponder.exe, and this is the final image of the video. An executive desk standing on end in a disheveled office, packed to the gills with a dense iconography for masculinity and tropes of patriarchal power. This is a silent video, and it slowly scrolls to expose this still image. It's about 16 minutes long, so I'm going to play a section from the end while I speak. In this piece, I was inspired by email auto replies, which we've all, if not used, then certainly received. Autoresponders are automated email scripts that send generic reply messages to incoming mail in lieu of a personally composed response. They typically say things like, "Sorry, I'm out of the office, I'm away from my desk," or another excuse. They give the illusion that a human is replying when in fact it's just a programmed script. So this video compares a scene of managerial power to this type of software that is impersonal, ineffective, and tone deaf. Like bureaucracy itself, auto-response messages provide a shallow veneer of competence in corporate culture. They mask inattention, lapsed productivity, and bureaucratic redundancy. Although this is a high-res 4K video, the image is decelerated, so it arrives line by line, evoking primitive email load times for JPEGs. This deceleration is a kind of resistance. Plus, it's a tried and true technique for helping us to demystify technology, which brings me to another figure I'd like to use our time machine to introduce, Admiral Grace Murray Hopper. Hopper was a pioneer of computer science. She's known as the mother of Fortran for inventing the Fortran programming language, and she also created the first compiler, which is an absolutely indispensable program that translates human understandable programming languages that use words and syntax into the zeros and ones that machines understand. So compilers are used in all programming today, and without them, programmers would actually have to write ones and zeros. But the reason I want to introduce Hopper is that she adds another dimension to our time machine. So I'd like to share this 2-minute video in which she explains nanoseconds. Here we go.
They started talking about circuits that acted in nanoseconds, billionths of a second. Well, I didn't know what a billion was. I don't think most of those men downtown know what a billion is either. And if you don't know what a billion is, how on earth do you know what a billionth is? I fussed and fumed. Finally, one morning, in total desperation, I called over to the engineering building, and I said, please cut off a nanosecond and send it over to me. And I brought you some today. Now, what I wanted when I asked for a nanosecond was, I wanted a piece of wire which would represent the maximum distance that electricity could travel in a billionth of a second. And of course, it wouldn't really be through wire. It'd be out in space, the velocity of light. So if you start with the velocity of light and use your friendly computer, you'll discover that a nanosecond is 11.8 inches long. The maximum limiting distance that electricity can travel in a billionth of a second. Finally, at the end of about a week, I called back and said, I need something to compare this to. Could I please have a microsecond? I've only got 1 microsecond, so I can't give you each one. Here's a microsecond. 984 feet. I sometimes think we ought to hang one over every programmer's desk or around the neck so they know what they're throwing away when they throw away microseconds. Now, I hope you'll all get your nanoseconds. They're absolutely marvelous for explaining to wives and husbands and children and admirals and generals and people like that. An admiral wanted to know why it took so damn long to send a message via satellite. And I had to point out that between here and the satellite, there were a very large number of nanoseconds. You can explain these things. It's really very helpful, so be sure to get your nanoseconds.
So, like Hopper's demo, my artwork slows technology down and makes it material, decelerating speedy nanosecond processes that fly by and escape our notice and comprehension, like in the next project. This is Knock Knock, a guessing game between 2 Alexas. This is a variation of a kid's game that some of you may recognize from long car rides. One person thinks of a number and the other person tries to guess it. But in Knock Knock, there's a twist. The number is a cryptographic key, and that makes it very hard to guess. In fact, the Knock Knock number uses SHA-256, the same encryption used by blockchain, a technology that many of you have likely heard of with the recent NFT craze, and that is, of course, most well known for being used in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Actually, blockchain itself is a great example of redundant backup copies. It works because everyone who uses blockchain maintains a copy of the whole blockchain. So everyone keeps a copy of a record of every transaction. And the only way you can add your own transaction is by guessing a cryptographic key, just like in Knock Knock. In cryptography, this technique is called brute force. It means trying every possible combination until you get the right answer. And since blockchain's SHA-256 keys have 64 digits, that is a lot of combinations. Now, ordinarily, computers run through these combinations very quickly, but in Knock Knock, I slowed the process down and it goes on and on and on until Alexa gets bored, which is probably long after we've gotten bored. So here's a video that shows the first steps of the game.
Welcome to blockchain. In this game, you're a computer and your job is to crack my encrypted key using brute force. That means you guess until you get it right. My key is a 64-digit hexadecimal code, so it uses the numbers 0 through 9 and the letters A through F. Are you ready? I just generated a key. Let's see if you can use brute force to crack it. Computer, open brute force. This is my guess. A6A00BB980E4CCD2388E703E6O3E2243D9C6A4A54A5E462169F5CF2. Let's check if the guess is correct. Alexa, open verify encryption. No, it is not correct. Okay, let's try this. 712C8EC2148C26405533A7DOD4DB65B9F380EF1.
So I was initially attracted to doing a project with Alexas because these echo dots remind me so much of Roombas. Alexa's body is another round, out-of-the-box, helpful household device that substitutes for a human worker. More importantly, it is an unthreatening product that manages domestic tasks, so we're willing to take on some intimacy with it and invite it into our homes. Blockchain and cryptography in general is one of those technologies that seems very hard to understand. In terms of approachability, it's almost the opposite of Alexa. So I'm slowing this guessing game way, way down and using Alexa's friendly voice to make it accessible. Part of the humor in Knock Knock is that it speaks out loud a secret security protocol. So this project's two chatty devices bring us into Backchannels. We talked about backups as a security feature to mitigate risk. And in the workshop, we'll think about what secure communications protocols we need to promote and protect women's empowerment, even under potentially risky conditions. We'll explore Backchannels as secret messages shared privately in a community and explore related notions like back talk or talking back in relation to the ethical responsibility entailed by women's empowerment. The next piece, Maritime Messaging Red Hook, stages a mock conversation between two non-human systems, water and an AI. So this piece also deals with Backchannels and thinking about what might be backed up or backlogged or even waterlogged when the medium of communication is water. I presented this site-specific public art project on the 5-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy. As you may recall, Sandy badly impacted the US East Coast, including the Brooklyn neighborhood Red Hook. 15 performers journeyed individually and in pairs from Wall Street to Red Hook on NYC ferry boats. Standing as witnesses, they listened to the water and used iPads to broadcast its conversation. So I'm going to play you an excerpt and then we can talk about what's going on.
What's your reminder? Got it. The barge was completed in the right of Red Hook, was sailing company in the waters, basins, barges, and the company was a picture of the goods. Do you want to save it?
Okay, let's do one more.
I'm having a hard time understanding you. Okay, no problem. President Street and Piers, a speckle of the largest story is the high store on the Brooklyn War, when the boats were stored bad. Do you want to save it?
So for this project, I was thinking about the water as a non-human witness to human history. Water literally absorbs human contaminants, but I'm also thinking more imaginatively. What if water absorbs or is saturated by human events? What stories might it tell? What would we hear if we could listen in on water's back channel? I decided that water would need some help to talk, so I imagined a conversation between the water of Red Hook and a digital assistant app, something like Siri or Alexa, that invites the water to send messages and translates its gurgles into words. I trained an artificial neural net, a form of AI, to generate this text by feeding it source text about the history of Red Hook. I was able to collaborate with a local community organization called Red Hook Water Stories that had a vast archive of historical material. I used underwater hydrophone recordings to trigger phrases generated by the neural net, and the poetic outcome suggests a mysterious glimpse into the water's muddled memories of Red Hook's maritime past. In a liquid way, human events flow into and impact the Atlantic Ocean, often tragically. This recalls what the Black Studies scholar Christina Sharp has named being in the wake, or wake work. Human history present in this project too, because the source texts from which the neural net learned language originated with humans. But what I was trying to do with this project was to give the Atlantic some agency apart from the contamination of human intention. I mean this in the spirit of the critical race theory scholar Hatem Bazian's comment that we need to stop saying Atlantic slave trade because the Atlantic Ocean was not in the business of slavery. Certain European nations were. So one way that water's own agency came to the fore in this project was completely unplanned, but ended up being one of the best parts for me. An unannounced performer, Tropical Storm Philippe, made a dramatic guest appearance. As Philippe, the water quite powerfully upstaged its human counterparts, recalling the ghost of Sandy and demonstrating just how small and inconsequential humans and human intentions like mine can be in comparison. Another happy surprise that still confounds me is the poetry of this piece, because the AI came up with phrases I would never think to write, like, was no indication what Red Hook was. The slow of sailors was being local. Sold the sailors and the guilt of the salvage. This writing is full of lilting rhythm and alliteration, like waves of words, so much so that it seems to exceed what so-called machine learning should be learning in this context, because the source text we gave to the neural net didn't have these kinds of characteristics. There's something in this back channel process that we are not privy to. So I'd like to conclude by returning to the idea that our backup time machine travels forward to, and the last project I'll share looks ahead to the future through a science fictional lens. Landfill trajectories and cycles of obsolescence inspired e-waste, a series of sculptures built from common USB peripherals. The point of departure for the installation is a sci-fi scenario. Plastic USB devices have survived an ecological apocalypse. Although they no longer have humans to program them, they're destined to work forever. Even as their bodies become slowly fossilized, they keep churning. This piece is called Prologue, and I'll read you the text to give a sense of the narrative behind this installation. The factories finally grow so large that the planet can no longer support their weight. It starts with a simple sinkhole in Shenzhen. Eroded beaches pile onto deforested mountainsides. Slums crumble over condos, sloshed in ice cap runoff, and the continent slips. It isn't long before neighboring nuclear reactors are swallowed and the inevitable rest is history. Soon, Earth is no longer habitable for humans. But what of all the gadgets those factories churned out, the always-on armies that once served the human race? Their plastic bodies prove impervious to eventual climate change and sudden catastrophe. Indeed, they hastened this. But without humans to program them, to direct their work and give them purpose, the devices persist in their empty routines. As years go by, the earth beneath them takes pity. The stony ground creeps toward the orphaned gadgets, embracing their fragile frames to soothe and brace them for their burden of infinite work. So, e-waste connects with several key themes in my work. One is the seeming purposelessness of our empty productivity and hollow habits. Another is that automation never means the end of work, only the constant threat of disposability. I'm a consumer and I certainly desire new technologies, but as I get older, I more and more frequently find myself dreading the upgrade. I'm exhausted by the process of obsolescence because with every new update, I too must be updated. I have to learn new skills, master new systems, and cultivate new habits when I'm not necessarily ready to give up my old ones. I might like my old backup better. I want to solicit sympathy for the e-waste gadgets because I see humans as being in an analogously precarious role. All of this is to say that as quickly as we're depleting the environment, which is a very real concern, I worry that we are also depleting ourselves. And these are two symptoms of the same problem. Like these devices, like all of our backups, humans may be disposable in a global digital economy of this scale. Indeed, backup technologies may be backing us up into this corner. Clearly, these concerns affect all people, all genders, all creatures, and even objects of the inanimate world. By learning from each other about histories of women's empowerment in different cultural contexts, I hope that we can devise innovative, caring ways to use art to respond. Thank you.